Thank you, everyone, for joining our webinar this evening. It's part of our Let's Talk Lupus webinar series. Tonight's topic is isolation and autoimmune disease. Social isolation can be challenging, and we've seen that to be much more prevalent in the past 3 years due to the pandemic and the restrictions around the pandemic. Tonight, Janice LeBlanc will be addressing this and providing some coping tools. Janice has over 20 years of clinical experience. She's a registered psychotherapist, registered art therapist, certified trauma and resilience specialist, and EMDR therapist. Before we begin, I'm just going to go over a few housekeeping items. Please note that all attendees will be in listen-only mode. Therefore, your audio and video have been disabled. Should you have a question, please put it in the chat box and we'll do our best to address that at the end of the webinar. We hope you'll find this webinar informative. I'm now going to pass this over to Ariana Rajbar, who is our moderator for this evening. Ariana?
Thank you, Leanne. Hi, everyone. Yes, I'll be the moderator for tonight. So if you have any questions or concerns throughout the webinar, please put it in the chat box and I'll be sure to address them to Janice. And yeah, if there's any issues or we want to make sure the chat box is working. So yeah, please participate in the polls and we're excited to have you, Janice. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Leanne and Ariana. And thank you so much to Lupus Canada for inviting me to talk tonight about such an important subject. So we're going to talk a little bit about isolation. This is a little bit about myself, my experience. I deal with a lot of clients with mental health issues, with chronic health issues. I work with many individuals with special needs like autism spectrum disorder, learning disabilities, and I'm a national speaker on resilience, anxiety, self-care for professionals, and chronic health conditions. So that's me. Just to mention, tonight is really for information and educational purposes. If you feel like anything we talk about this evening is relevant to you, you may want to check it out with a mental health professional or a physician for assessment and further diagnosis. We're not here to diagnose or treat this evening. We're going to leave that up to the health professionals, but it is for education and information, and hopefully it will be helpful to you. So where we're headed tonight, we want to have a look at isolation and looking at defining it, what it means. The second part is looking around feelings around isolation and what isolation can impact in terms of people's lives. And then most of the talk I'd like to spend most of the time on coping with isolation, as well as self-care, and then looking at a few resources and references. So first, let's look at isolation, what it actually is. So right now, we are 3 years after the beginning of the pandemic, 3 long years for most people. And it seems now that most people are moving on to a pre-pandemic life and lifestyle, which means many people are not masking anymore. Many people are back to school and work. There's no real need for social distancing for a lot of people. And the level of fear has definitely decreased, almost to the point that there isn't a lot of fear. However, for many people, especially those with an autoimmune disease, life really still is on lockdown. So there's a continued need to mask to be safe. There's still working and studying from home, no longer going into or not going back to a workplace or an educational institution. Social distancing is still necessary to stay safe. And there's a continued sense of fear and a continued sense of being vigilant in order to remain safe and somewhat healthy. And so the impact of the pandemic really continues for many, many people, which can result in feeling stuck and also feeling very isolated and alone as the world sort of moves on and people are feeling a little left behind. So it's important, if you do feel the need to isolate, it's important to look at your viewpoint on things. So we've heard over the last 3 years over and over again that humans are social beings, and how you view your situation is crucial. So we want to look at, being alone versus isolation. So the concept of being alone can be very positive. It can be relaxing, it can be rejuvenating. When people say, I just need a bit of alone time to regroup and, so I can re-energize, that can be very positive in being alone. The difference between being alone and isolation is not usually a choice. It's where someone is really wanting to be social, but it's not safe to do so. And thus there isn't a lot of choice. It's kind of forced upon them where they need to stay at home and basically be on their own, but it has a more negative connotation. So you want to sort of look at what your viewpoint is, and also looking at the difference between being alone and being lonely. So again, being alone can be very positive, but that sense of loneliness, I mean, people can feel lonely while they're actually around other people. So we want to look at some of the feelings around isolation. And there are many, many feelings that come up when people are isolated. And one of the main messages this evening that I want to put forth is that feelings need to be felt, they need to be expressed, and that pushing them down or squashing them is really not healthy and is not going to be helpful in the long run. Because any type of feeling, positive, negative, it's going to bubble up somewhere else. So these things do need to be expressed. So just some of the actual feelings that may come up as people are feeling the need to isolate. Frustration and anger can be quite prevalent. Frustration and anger at seeing the rest of the world moving on, getting back to a regular routine, and feeling that anger that, well, I can't do that. It's not safe for me to do that. And I can't participate in a lot of the regular activities that people do in day-to-day life. There can be feelings of embarrassment and shame, especially when folks have to explain over and over again, well, I can't go to that family reunion, or I can't go to that wedding, or I can't go to that party because it's really not safe for me. And starting to feel left out, and those feelings of embarrassment and shame at having to explain why they can't attend and why it's not safe can bring up a lot of those feelings. There can be a lot of sadness and depression. Some folks may have a grief reaction that they are missing out. There can be a sense of hopelessness. Are things ever going to get better? Can I ever return to that sense of participating in the work everyone else gets to do? And then also that feeling of disconnection. And that can be a disconnection from others, but it can also be a disconnection from the self or from oneself. Because when we socialize, when human beings socialize with other people provide a bit of a mirror to ourselves, and it gives us information from others about what we're about. And when we don't have that social connection, we don't have that mirror, which means sometimes we can feel disconnected from who we are. I hope that makes sense. So I just want to mention a little bit more about depression and anxiety and when they reach sort of clinical levels. And I did talk more about depression and anxiety in a webinar I did for lupus a number of years ago. It is on the website, and it's Lupus and Mental Health. So there's more details in that talk about this. But I just wanted to mention briefly that when the symptoms of depression and anxiety come up and they're beyond the regular level of being a bit sad or being a bit nervous, then they really need to be looked at. So there's a list of symptoms of depression, symptoms of anxiety, which I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here, but there's a couple of red flags and warning signs that I just want folks to be aware of. So they're typical human emotions. You feel sad once in a while, you feel nervous once in a while, not a big deal. We can cope with them, we can carry on. But when these feelings become long lasting and they start to interrupt functioning, that's when there's a red flag. When these are really prevalent, can't get out of bed, can't function, can't do what we need to do because of anxiety or depression or nervousness and sadness that's just gotten very big, then that's the time that these symptoms, behaviors, thoughts, feelings, they need to be discussed with either a mental health professional or a medical doctor for assessment and to look at treatment options. So those are things that you don't want to ignore. And it's important to try to communicate some of these feelings with other people. Sometimes we I mean, I do it. We all do it. We think, well, they should know. They should know how I feel. Like, how can they not know how I feel? People are not mind readers. So sometimes we really need to put some effort, some thought, some effort into actually communicating, this is how I'm feeling right now, and not assume that people know how I'm feeling. So whether it's friends, whether it's family, employers, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about, really how you feel about breaking that isolation and how you're feeling when you have to say no to things and you have to isolate, and to be honest about how you feel. And this is challenging. This is a challenging area for sure. And just communicating with employers. We do know that there are a lot of workplaces who are now wanting folks to come back into the workplace, into the office, into the actual physical structure, the environment of work. And working from home is becoming less and less. So if you're feeling that encouragement / pressure to return to the workplace, it's really a personal decision on whether it's safe for you to do that or not. But it's also a personal decision on what you are comfortable revealing and disclosing to your employer. And everyone is very different. But when possible, the best route is to be able to have an honest conversation. That's usually best, because that will cut down on anxiety, and it may cut down on challenges in the future. So many of my clients may be off work for various reasons. And when we start to do a return to work plan, the more information that the employer has in general, the more they're willing to accommodate the person, the more understanding they are, the more flexible they become, because they start to get it. They understand what's going on with the person. And you want to be really clear about what some appropriate accommodations might be helpful for you. So if you're having the conversation that, possibly I can try to come back into a workplace, it's important to look at what's realistic and what will really help you, so the employer can also look at that. And it may be possible to provide your employer with information, educational information about your autoimmune disease, because many people are totally unaware. They just don't know. They would love to understand, but they don't have the education. So sometimes if there's that opportunity, like on a wellness day or some other type of educational forum, that might be very helpful. So just a few helpful phrases as examples that might be useful for people when they're trying to communicate how they feel. So to try to be as honest as you possibly can. And some examples might be, what works for me is, or what doesn't work for me is, at this time, I'm able to or not able to, and what are you able to do? What are you not able to do? And I hope you can understand that my autoimmune disease causes me to, and whatever that happens to be. And there are many, many ways to communicate in these difficult conversations. These are just a few examples that you might find useful. So just a bit of a poll, and you can put your answers in the chat, and Ariane, I think, will kind of tally them or give us what the poll is at.
I'll just communicate them with you. Yeah, for sure.
Okay. So what feelings impact you the most? Is it anger, frustration, nervousness, anxiety, sadness, depression, or are there others? Or are there others that I didn't even mention? There's a whole gamut of feelings, of course, that would come up.
We'll just wait a few minutes for people to put in their answers.
Sure.
So far, B, an A, frustration, C, A, C. It's a little bit of everything so far.
Yeah, it can be a mix as well, of course. Okay. Yeah, so I mean, feelings run the gamut. Everyone's experience is going to be a little bit different. So we also want to look at what isolation can impact, because it has far-reaching impacts on different parts of our lives. So when we look at employment, some people can feel unsuccessful in their job or career. They may lose their job, so there may be a loss of income, of course, which would then may possibly create some financial issues. there may be less chance of advancement, or they may feel there's less chance of advancement and not feeling completely fulfilled in their role if they're isolating away from other people in the workplace. Can also impact participation in different activities in life. So feeling left out, feeling less joy or satisfaction, because often, different activities that we participate in, they give us a whole other sense of purpose and joy and satisfaction beyond our job and beyond our careers. Can also impact self-esteem and self-image, may create a bit of a negative outlook, can decrease confidence. And again, looking at some of the loneliness that can come up, which I mentioned at the beginning. Personal relationships, of course, you can feel a little bit disconnected if you're isolating, feeling left out, and not creating any new social memories if you're not able to participate in different social functions with family and friends. And of course, it can impact the future. A lot of what ifs can come up. What will happen in the future? What if I can't go back to a workplace? What if I can't participate in things, which can create a lot of those feelings I talked about, especially anxiety in terms of the what ifs. So now to look at how to cope with the isolation and looking at some very simple strategies, that you can possibly use to just improve the quality of life. So two areas that I want to talk about when coping with isolation. One is making connections, and the other is some self-care strategies while isolating. So first of all, looking at connecting. So how do we connect with family and friends while distancing, while isolating, and how to sort of do this may seem somewhat overwhelming. And really all of these tips and things, different suggestions that I'm including in this talk tonight, the overriding message needs to be you need to start small. So I'm throwing out a lot of different ideas. Some of them maybe you've thought of, you've tried, maybe you want to retry them, maybe there's a few new things, but it's really important to take those baby steps. And if, I mentioned 20 things, you might pick out one and try that for a couple of weeks and see how it fits and see how it goes. If you try everything at once, human nature, it will not stick. It won't be long lasting. So you want to start small and just very slow and very steady. So you want to develop a very strong and positive support system. It's important that they're positive. You want people that have a positive outlook, that are not negative, and are really going to support you with whatever you happen to be going through, especially while you're isolating. So that, of course, includes family and friends, can be doctors, family doctors, specialists. And I mean, with the pandemic, so many doctors now are doing visits virtually. Yes, we still have to go in sometimes to see them, but often they will do the phone call or they'll do the virtual calls now, which is something much more readily available to people. Natural remedy doctors like naturopaths, homeopaths, mental health professionals, many of us, social workers and registered psychotherapists, many of us are working virtually. If you had asked me 3 years ago, would I ever work virtually? The answer would have been absolutely not. But now I'm 100% virtual and I probably won't be going back. So that's something that you can definitely make connections with if you're isolating from home. Faith-based supports and support groups as well, which I'll also talk about a little bit later. So how to connect with people. I think people got very creative, even those without, any autoimmune disease, got very creative on how to keep connected during COVID. So it's really getting creative and looking at different ways to connect. So of course we have all of the online platforms like email, texting, social media, which I'll speak about a bit later as well, and video conferencing, things like Zoom, like we're doing right now. There's lots of online peer support groups, common interest groups, the old-fashioned telephone, making a call to somebody, writing someone, and of course, visiting outside at a distance. Not everything has to be virtual or through electronic means, actually seeing people, but distancing so that one can stay safe. and really thinking outside the box. People got really good at this. And this list is by no means finite. There's many ways to do different things online with various people. So Zoom parties, scavenger hunts, puzzles, competitions, group board games or other games, anything that keeps you connected to another human being by doing something a little bit fun. And then connecting online through hobbies or different interests. So again, this is endless. Anything you can think of, there's a way to connect online with people with the same interests. So I just listed a few: reading online, books online, knitting, woodworking, crafts, art classes, cooking, courses of interest to learn something new, learning languages, doing travel, different travel interests, etc. Because this is where many friendships can come from. If you're around like-minded people with common interests, you could actually develop into friendships, which then decrease the feelings of being isolated, the feelings of isolation. So another poll: what ways do you stay connected to others while isolating?
Someone said through texting, through video chat, through phone calls, book groups. Yeah, I find it interesting because even on Facebook, like there are so many groups that you can be a part of.
Yeah.
And I know Lupus, there's a Lupus Canada community group on Facebook. But that's such a great way to connect with people through hobbies and interests. Distanced walking.
Yeah.
Spending time outside, distance walking.
All right. So I'll go on. If there's others, please share them.
Yeah, absolutely. Someone said having nicer weather and having coffee outside with a friend.
Yeah. So I also want to look at taking care of yourself during isolation. So always when we're looking at any type of self-care, it's good to look at all these different areas of our life. It helps keep us balanced. So you want to look at, am I addressing some physical needs, mental needs, spiritual needs, emotional needs, social needs, and environmental needs? And ideally, each of these areas should be targeted every day. It doesn't mean you're doing a lot in one area, but each one you should be kind of looking at and considering each day. What am I doing, for my spiritual life? And that doesn't necessarily mean that's religious. It can be meditation. It can be taking 10 minutes just to be very quiet and very mindful. So you're always kind of looking, and that helps keep us balanced. That's a little wellness plan. And then we always start with healthy lifestyle choices. So you want to look at your eating. Are you eating healthy food? Are you staying hydrated? We are chronically dehydrated. People do not drink enough water. So looking at how much water you're taking in. Are your sleep habits healthy? Again, we're chronically exhausted, I think, in this society. Looking at mild exercise, which I'll talk about in a minute, and decreasing or eliminating use of alcohol and drugs. So we always look at that physical level first, because everything really comes from there. And then be creative in trying to connect to yourself in terms of relaxation. So looking at creativity, I'm an art therapist. The creative part, I always need to work into these talks. So looking at art or music or drama or cooking, anything that you feel can reduce stress, can cause some relaxation, and help you to connect to yourself. So even meditation or prayer, listening to music, developing a mindfulness practice can really help decrease that sense of isolation, because you may be connecting with others, but you're also connecting to yourself. It's creativity that allows us to do that. Establishing a routine is really important when people are isolating. When I work with clients who are off work for any reason, that's one of the first things that we look at, because going to school, going to a job, doing those things, that gives us a sense of purpose. And when that is gone for whatever reason, even temporarily, we need to establish our own routine. So one of the things I always suggest is to get up at the same time every day and go to bed at the same time every day. That creates consistency in your sleep patterns, and it gives your day a little bit of a predictability in terms of how it's going to run. I also suggest dividing your day into sections or chunks. So you have a morning chunk, an afternoon chunk, an evening chunk. I have had clients where they want to do a schedule that's like 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock. It's too strict. And that makes it a little bit harder to follow. So if you have these 3 sections of your day and look for meaningful activities that you can do in each part of that day, that can really help in terms of waking up in the morning and saying, okay, it's Wednesday. On Wednesday, this is what I'm going to do. And it gives that sense of purpose. And it's really important to write it down. It doesn't have to be carved in stone, but to have just even a week plan, what you're going to do in these different parts of the day, come up with different things. And maybe it's doing a webinar, or maybe it's doing a bit of exercise, or maybe it's looking at some nutritional things. Whatever it happens to be, that routine is super important. Physical activity, also very important. Any type of physical activity that you're going to do, whether it's new, whether it's something you used to do that you're bringing back, I highly advise that you discuss it with your medical professional. Even doing things outside, discuss it with your medical professionals, because we don't want to cause harm. So these are some things that you may want to think about, but please check them out before you participate. So gentle, mindful walking, a few folks here mentioned that, outside. Going outside gives us a whole different experience in terms of our senses. So we see something different, we smell different smells, we're in a different light, we have a different quality of air. And yes, you have to be cautious in terms of exposure to sunlight, but if it's for you and if it's safe, it gets you away from social media, and doing it with a friend, or socially distancing, can be really positive. So outside, I can't say enough about that. It can be very, very helpful as long as it's safe for you. That's the qualifier. Even joining an online exercise class, a lot of the rec centers still have virtual classes, all kinds of different exercise class, looking at things like yoga, Tai Chi, Pilates, again, if it's for you, even chiropractor care. I know a chiropractor who was doing a lot virtually. So whatever fits with you, to start thinking about what might be helpful. Helping someone else can always help us get out of our own heads, out of our own world, and help us feel connected. So even while isolating, you don't have to go somewhere to volunteer. There are many charities who are begging for volunteers to make calls, to do scheduling, to do fundraising on the phone, to make things like crocheting hats, sewing blankets, whatever it happens to be. I think the list is endless in terms of helping others. And it helps you feel like I'm doing something good, I'm helping other people, and I'm kind of getting out of my own world. So that's something to think about as well. So looking at negative thinking, again, I talked more about this in the mental health talk for lupus that's on the website. So I won't go into it too much, but really looking at, if you do have that internal voice that's very negative, to really look at it and really start to challenge and reframe some of those thoughts. And sort of a quick way to do that is do 2 very short and very brief little phrases, little sentences. So it's important to validate how you're feeling. So if you're feeling negative and you're having negative thoughts, it's like, okay, I'm noticing this. This is what's happening. But asking yourself 2 things. 1, where's the evidence for this? So whatever the negative thought going through, ask yourself, where's the evidence? Where's the proof? Because oftentimes our negative thoughts, we're jumping to conclusions. We really don't have proof. We don't have evidence that this is going to happen, or it's even happening at the time. So in order to shift the thing, if there's no evidence, we need to move on to something else. The other phrase is this useful? Is this useful that I'm worrying about what's going to happen a year from now when maybe I don't have control over it? Is it useful for me to worry about whatever it is I'm worrying about Usually the answer is no. So the human brain will go over and over and over something, will perseverate, will ruminate, will be on that hamster wheel thinking, I call it, when we're trying to figure out something. And that's fine. If there's something to figure out, then you keep thinking about it. Then it's useful. But if you're just thinking and ruminating and going around and around and you're not coming to a solution, then it's not useful and you need to stop, distract, and move on. So those two phrases can be really pretty quick at starting to reframe some of that negative thinking and just to create a more balanced thought patterns. So part of that is looking at what you can control. And, we talk a lot about what we can control. This is a bit of a review, but a nice little exercise is just to draw a circle, put the things that you can control on the inside, put the things that you cannot control on the outside, and then just focus on what's on inside the circle. Because often frustration, anxiety, all those feelings that get us all kind of worked up, they're coming from a place of having no control. And if we identify, what am I thinking about? What am I ruminating about? And ask yourself, each of those things, can I control it? Can I not? Where does it go in the circle? And that often gives a little bit of perspective and helps us refocus where our energy needs to be and get it away from the stuff that you can't control. Because why think about it? Why worry about it if we have no control over it? Social media. Social media can be fabulous, can be wonderful in helping people stay connected. However, I think we all realize this and we know this, but sometimes we get kind of hooked in. So social media often presents perfection, people's perfect lives. They're eating perfect dinners. They're traveling to wonderful places. Their relationships are fantastic. Everything is wonderful. And we know on some level that that's false, that's superficial, and it's just not true. However, we still look at it, we still read it, we still wish, oh, I wish I could do that. I wish I could, be participating in that. And what can happen is we can come up with feelings of being feeling more isolated and more discouraged and having more disconnect from people rather than connecting with people, which is what we want to use social media for. So sometimes it can backfire. And it's also important to stay informed. And social media is a great place for news sources, but you want to make sure they're reliable and they're reputable. Because there's a lot of fake news out there that, again, sort of backfires and makes us feel worse after we've read it or participated in it. This is a little graphic that I pulled off. Again, it's also in the mental health talk, but it's also can relate to creating a routine. Just kind of a more fun or looser way to do it. So this came up during COVID, really, and a lot of people used it who were isolating, but a well-being daily to-do list. So kind of looking at this each day. So looking at some essential tasks, like taking a shower, taking medication, cleaning one thing or one space, depending how much you want to take on in a day. Tend to something growing, like a plant, a child, a pet, you can add in there as well. Be mindfully present to a song or a sound, a sensory feeling, something you see, or a spiritual practice. Again, that's feeding the senses. Reach out to one human being beyond your home. Do one thing to get your heart rate up, and do one thing you'd be glad you did later, which is a lovely one to kind of add to your day. So this is something when you're looking at that daily routine is something that you can add to a little looser, a little more fun, maybe. Another poll: what coping strategies do you find helpful or useful to you?
Setting a schedule. Someone has said.
A schedule can be super helpful. Just gives us that structure that we need.
Yeah. I agree. That's something I personally do is always put a schedule and like checklist that I go out throughout.
Yeah.
Someone said gratitude and creativity practices,
Mhm,
talking to a trusted friend, getting the negativity and worries out in the open and off your mind.
mhm.
Someone said started to take ukulele lessons for fun.
Oh,
Right.
cool.
I know we spoke about this briefly prior to this, but having animals and using them sort of
Yes.
coping strategies. I know that's what, oh, someone just said taking care of my dog. Yeah.
Yeah.
Someone asked about if this webinar will be available. Yes, and it is being recorded and will be on our website 24 to 48 hours after this is done. And it will be available on our YouTube channel as well. Someone else said starting the day with positive thoughts.
Mhm.
Yeah, I find it great when people start new hobbies as adults, because I
Mm.
find that sometimes it's hard to get out of your comfort zone and try different coping strategies.
Mhm.
But it always is so helpful because it kind of gets your mind focused on something else and trying something new.
Yeah, absolutely. I have a client who starts her day just with a couple of words as an intention. So kind of it is a gratitude practice, but it's just sort of, patience or just something one or two words, a small phrase that she's trying to work on. And just as she kind of wakes up in the morning, she takes a few minutes and just kind of sets a bit of an intention so that that's on her mind during the day as she goes about her day, which is a lovely way to start the day.
Yeah, that's a great way, actually. That's a great idea.
Mhm.
That's all we have right now.
Okay, great. All right. So just looking at a few other resources and supports. So looking at support groups, being with like-minded people in a support group can provide a number of things, including emotional support, different ideas for treatment, what's working for people, what's not working for people. I tried this, what about that? And just getting different ideas that may be helpful. It can be a sounding board for frustrations, and it can be a place for understanding and hope. A couple of things to look for in support groups is number one, who's facilitating the group? Is it someone who has the same condition or has that common health element in terms of their background? Is it also looking at the mandate of the group? Is it a therapeutic group? Is it an educational group? Because those things are going to put a slant on what type of group it is. And you want to make sure that it's going to be a good fit for you. Sometimes you don't know until you try it, but those are some things to kind of ask when you're looking at support groups. And the Lupus Canada website has a little bit more information on that. And a few other resources, Lupus Canada, of course, your family doctor, CAMH as well, in terms of mental health. Just looking at hope in terms of building a less isolating life. Asking yourself if there are resources that you can re-access from the past, things you used to do, places you used to go, things that used to really help, but perhaps have fallen off a little bit over time. And again, just to remind people to make small and gradual changes, slow and steady, that's what wins. Okay, so taking one idea and trying it for a little while and see how that fits, and then going from there. And really to be kind and gentle to yourself and to others as you make some of these changes to try to be a little less isolated. And next steps, I know that finding support can be very challenging. If you feel like someone you care about or yourself, you may need additional support surrounding mental health or, looking at strategies to feel less isolated. I'm happy to help with that. If you want to contact me to sort of navigate the system, provide guidance on how and where to get support, because it can be a little bit overwhelming. In terms of what's out there, in terms of wait lists, private, public, all of that. So if I can be of help in any of that, I'm happy to do so. And there's my contact info there. And then there's just a few, again, this will be on the website, but just a few sources as well. And just really any questions I'm happy to take now.
Thank you. That was such a great presentation.
I think if anyone has any questions, please feel free to pop them in the chat. We have a few minutes and Janice is available to answer some of your questions.
Sure.
We'll just give that a few minutes to see if anyone has some questions.
Someone said, can you speak more on processing difficult feelings, especially grief?
That's a whole webinar on itself. But I think in terms of grief, sometimes I think what you want to look at is whether you're stuck in that process, because grief really is a process and people will go through or have a grief response very differently. So you want to sort of look at that you're moving through the different feelings that come up when we're grieving and that you're not stuck in one feeling all the time. And if you feel like you're noticed or other people are noticing you're really stuck and you're not moving and a lot of time has gone by, especially, then you may want to look for some professional guidance with someone who specializes in grief. Because sometimes it's hard. People get stuck. We all get stuck. And sometimes we just need an outside person, a professional person, to kind of look and say, hey, have you tried this? Why don't we try this? Have you thought about this? And really help you process some of those feelings. That's kind of it in a nutshell. I hope that answers.
Thank you for that. Someone has asked if you have any quick tips for handling a rush of anxiety and regulating yourself, so you don't get into like a panic attack. And I don't know if you were, when you were talking about the grounding and like the schedule and stuff, if that relates to that at all, or if you have anything in particular that you would like to share.
Yeah, in the mental health talk that's on the Lupus website, I believe, if I recall, I gave a number of examples of how to deal with the anxiety, and some of the best ones are the grounding exercises. So you can even Google grounding exercises and they'll come up. And one of the best ones is dealing with the senses. So you ask yourself, okay, what are 5 things I can see right now? What are 5 things I can hear? What are 5 things I can touch? 5 things I can smell. Often there's not a taste, but you go through, and what happens is, very quickly, how anxiety works is your brain is in that fight or flight mode. And in order to get out of that fight or flight mode, we want to be grounded in the present, because the brain cannot do 2 things at once. We pretend it can, but it really can't. So when we're anxious, we want to put a halt to that anxiety before it escalates to a panic attack. And how do we do it? We shift to thinking about something right now. So what am I seeing? What am I hearing? What am I smelling? What am I touching? With little kids that have a lot of anxiety, I'll do things like, tell me 5 red things that are in this room, 5 blue things that are in this room, 5 yellow things that are in this room. It doesn't really matter what you do, but you'll notice right now, whatever you were thinking about a minute ago, when I said, what are 5 things you can see? You probably looked around. Well, you're not thinking about what you were thinking about a minute ago, right? So it's really effective to use the senses, because that's what's going to ground you. The brain is going to relax. It's going to take you out of fight or flight, and you're not going to escalate into a panic attack.
Thank you. Someone has asked about just being newly diagnosed and new to meds and the best resource for starting to navigate all of this. And not that I don't think this is a specific question for Janice, but Lupus Canada has a lot of resources on our website. We have brochures available. We have our social media accounts, our YouTube accounts with a lot of videos from specialists that talk about navigating your diagnosis. And we do have our closed Facebook group that a lot of people come to the community to ask questions about their diagnosis and their journey. And a lot of people are helpful there. Leanne, I don't know if you have anything to add regarding that.
Yeah, I think those are all great resources. I think that Facebook closed group, you can feel comfortable in that group. It is monitored. There is no medical advice that should be given, but you can get advice from other folks that may have been through a situation similar to yours. And being newly diagnosed, everybody has gone through that. and to really have a better understanding of what your future looks like. And speaking with your medical professionals, your healthcare team will also help you to understand that, because we do say that lupus is a disease of 1,000 faces. So how everybody will encounter this disease and how they will live may be different from one another, but it's always good to, as Janice said, to talk to people, talk out things, and you might take some bits and pieces of that might be helpful to you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think adding to what Janice was speaking about and sort of what Leanne and I have been discussing with different lupus patients is just being sure about where you get your information from and making sure that it's all trusted sources and sourced information, just because, again, it is a very personal disease, and you just want to make sure that, you know, you're getting the right information.
Yeah. And if there's any follow-up questions to something like that, we're happy to assist you. Please feel free to email at info@lupuscanada.org, or you can always give us a call, and we'll do our best to help you with some of those questions and try and point you in the right directions.
We don't have any other questions right now, but maybe as people are thinking of more questions or we're wrapping up, I just wanted to talk to everyone about Lupus Awareness Month, which is coming up on May 1st. And Lupus Canada has a lot of great initiatives happening throughout May. There is World Lupus Day on May 10th and Put on Purple Day on May 19th. Our newsletter will be going out on May 1st. So if you want to know all about what's happening with Lupus Canada during May and the different activities, please subscribe to our newsletter and visit our website. We do have some things published already, and throughout the week, we'll be updating and adding more as time gets closer to Lupus Awareness Month. And yeah, Leanne, I don't know if you have anything else to add to that.
Yeah, with Lupus Awareness Month, there's many ideas on our website and how you can participate, and they can be done in many different forms. And I think it also addresses some of the ideas that Janice has talked about while doing it in a safe manner. You can do it by yourself or with a friend or family, but you know, helping to create the awareness for lupus this month. And by doing so, by even just sharing our posts, sharing social media information, you know, sharing the newsletter with people you may know, or having friends or family or colleagues also sign up for the newsletter is always helpful in helping to create that awareness and educate people about what it's like to live with this disease. There'll be some great things. There'll be some great videos, some great reels. We're really looking forward to Lupus Awareness Month to bring a lot of great information to you folks. And we also will be having another webinar in May. And it is actually a collaboration with the Arthritis Society. And so we hope people will join us then. That information will also be available in our newsletter. I just want to take this opportunity to thank Janice for presenting tonight. I think you provided some valuable information, some great coping tools. And I think, you know, we had some great questions and answers there. So thanks ever so much, Janice, for once again putting together a great presentation, very informative. We really appreciate your time this evening.
Thank you, Leanne. Yeah, it was a pleasure. It's an important topic for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, so I guess we'll wrap it up there. Have a great night, everyone. Someone just said thank you all. And yes, thank you again, Janice, for joining us tonight.
You're welcome.
Have a good evening, everyone.
Okay, take care.
Bye-bye.